aside and put their lives in the hands of men from every single religion and every single race on this world. So if you want to honor a Confederate soldier, you have to honor men of all races and religions. So anyway, I get off my soapbox now because y'all are on the same box with me, actually. And I'm going to talk about my book and the Battle of the Crater. This is a historical novel. People have asked me why didn't I just write a history book. Well, lots of history books have actually been written about the crater, and I could have put some new things out that have not been said before. And I think I actually did it in the book. But the one thing that usually is missing in most historical books is the emotional side as well. So this book is much like Killer Angels that was written, and it goes both Union and Confederate sides. But what's different about it doesn't just stay up in the upper echelon of the colonels to the generals. This goes from the privates all the way to the general, even the presidents. President Lincoln and President Davis both make an appearance in the book. And they made an appearance when, and on the dates, they actually did come to Petersburg. So this also encompasses the civilian side as well as the military side. So you've got, and I center on the military side on the Confederates on the 12th Virginia Infantry. 12th Virginia Infantry was made up of men from Petersburg. So they were literally in their backyard on grounds they grew up playing on as a child. So their parents and their wives and their sweethearts were within shelling range of the Yankees. Always love how or really hate actually, how the Yankees celebrated the 4th of July of 1864 by firing every gun they had along the lines into Petersburg, killing innocent men, women, and children as well. They knew darn well where the Confederates were, the Army, but they would fire over them into the city. But anyway, Petersburg in June of 1864, the 1st of June, Petersburg had not seen or heard an angry shot of war. They had sent their sons and their husbands off to war, and many women in Petersburg were widows, or their sons were killed, had been killed, and so there's lots of sorrow in Petersburg. But as far as the war itself, it had not reached Petersburg. On June the 9th of 1864, it reached Petersburg for the first time. The siege of Petersburg actually started on June 15th. But just a few days earlier, on June the 9th, you know, at the Bermuda Hundred area between the James and the Appomattox River, General Beast Butler was there, and the army of the James, the Union Army, and he had sent down both infantry and cavalry to try to burn the bridges in Petersburg. But he was stopped the infantry was stopped by the 46th Virginia and other Confederate units that were stationed down there. But on the east side of Petersburg, but the cavalry was attacking from the south. There's 1,300 Federal cavalry, and they attacked the Home Guard. 125 old men and young boys defended that portion of the line, and they held them off long enough, several hours actually, for reinforcements to get into the city to keep them from burning the bridges into Petersburg. But most citizens in Petersburg believed that these old men and these young boys, school-age kids to men that were in their 60s, at the first angry shot fired at them, they were sure they were going to run like rabbits. Well, these men proved their mettle, proved their worth, and held their ground and lost half their number, either captured or killed that day. So Petersburg owed a great debt to its citizens. One fellow said he'd never listen to another angry word spoken about a lawyer, because lawyers were out there fighting and giving up their lives for freedom. So anyway, but on June 15th, matter of fact, General Grant was very upset when he found out about this, because he had already planned to come down to Petersburg next. You know, during the spring campaign of 1864, he come down to the Wilderness, and then to Spotsylvania, and then to North Anna, and then to Cold Harbor. He tried to leapfrog around Robert E. Lee. This was the first time he actually succeeded in leapfrogging around Lee. He always met him ahead of time. But at Petersburg was being defended at this time by the Army of Southern Virginia and Northern North Carolina, commanded by P.T.G. Beauregard. And they were drastically outnumbered by the Union Army that got there. But when the Union Army got there on June 15th, they had force marched there. They were extremely tired, and they attacked in piecemeal as they arrived. And most of them were repulsed back. But that first day's battle, there's a black unit, and I can't remember which unit it was right now, but they actually captured Battery 5 and the fort there of the Dimmock line, which is the line they call that Colonel Dimmock had designed protections from Petersburg, coming on the east and south side of Petersburg, because they figured if any attack came to Petersburg, it'd come from the east, they'd come up the James River, and which is exactly what happened. But anyway, Grant, like I said, Grant was extremely upset because he thought that his hand had been tipped. He was going to Petersburg. But on June 15th, Lee was still around Cold Harbor with most of his army. So when Petersburg was attacked that first day, it was sort of ironic that Butler had actually loaned them the 18th Corps. The only captives that the Confederates had of Union soldiers was from the 18th Corps, which was from the Army of the James. Lee was looking for proof that Grant's army and the Army of the Potomac was down there, or I should say Meade's army. But he said, I can't, because Beauregard was sending messenger after messenger to Robert E. Lee, telling him to bring the army down here. Petersburg will fall if you don't bring the army down here. And if Petersburg falls, Richmond's going to fall, which we know eventually that was the case. But he said, I need proof, show me. And it wasn't until the night or June 17th and early morning of June 18th that they finally started capturing Union soldiers that were members of the 9th Corps, which are part of the Army of the Potomac. But I started my book at a very pivotal moment. It's actually the night of June 17th at 10:30 at night. Confederate felt that when that first day's battle happened and the Yankees captured that first line of defenses, they fell back to a second line of defenses that had been already prepared for them. And they were busy preparing actually a third line of defenses just in case, but it wasn't ready yet. But at 10:30 at night, General Ledley's division of the 9th Corps, there are 4 divisions in the 9th Corps. These are the fellows that fought at the Crater. I will talk about them. So you need to know all 4 divisions. You got General Ledley, General Frero, General Wilcox, and General Potter. Okay? Well, Ledley's division actually captured the second line of defenses around Petersburg. And there was a South Carolina unit that went into battle that night to try to retake the Confederate works. And they were told to hold their fire until they were face to face with them, about as far as I am from that back wall there, before they yelled and fired into the faces of the Yankees. Now, they came up, fired a shot, and rushed into the trenches. Now these men were unloaded, okay? So they were using their muskets as clubs, stabbing bayonets. I know Southern steel met Northern flesh, and Northern steel met Southern flesh. And it was a terrible, terrible hand-to-hand battle. Matter of fact, there were so many dead and dying in this small area, this trench, that most of the men fighting, both Union and Confederate, were not standing on the ground. We're standing on top of dead and dying comrades. And when their foot did go down and touch the ground, the blood was so deep there, it overflowed. Their boots were ankle deep, and it overflowed their boots and down into their shoes. So that's how horrible this battle was. Well, there was a Union colonel there by the name of Colonel Weld, and he was sending back message after message to General Ledlie to send up more ammunition, send up more reinforcements. Well, none came. Finally, the Confederates pushed the Yankees back out, and they fled back. The Confederates had reestablished their line, which gave more time for the third line of defenses to be prepared, which they did after the Yankees were repulsed. Another hour later, they withdrew to the third line of defenses. So Colonel Weld now is mad as a hornet. He storms back to General Ledlie's camp, walks into his camp demanding to see the general. He's met at the edge of the camp by the general's aide saying, "You can't see the general. It's impossible to see the general." He said, "We took the Confederate lines." He said, "All those men up there died for nothing. We could have held it if we'd gotten a few more men, a little bit more ammunition. Those men's lives demands that I see General Ledlie." He says, okay, come with me. So he led him around back behind the general's tent and laid out this little ravine with General Ledlie passed out stone cold drunk. I can't make this stuff up, okay? Everything I'm telling you is fact. His aide leaned over General Ledlie and said, General Ledlie, Colonel Weld is here to report." "General Ledlie, Colonel Weld's here to report." He starts kicking him in the rib. Finally, General Ledlie sits up and he says, "General Ledlie, Colonel Weld is here to report." Well, Colonel Weld knew he couldn't cuss the general out, which he wanted to do. He told him, he basically made a report and then said, "Sir, why didn't you send some more men, some more ammunition? It's all we needed. We could have held that line." General Ledlie's response to that was, "Well, look around you, man. We've got thousands of men." Passed out again. Okay? I talk about Ledlie because he is an important part in the crater later on. Okay. Now, Robert E. Lee has gotten proof that the ninth, not just the Ninth Corps, but Grant's army is there. He starts sending his army down south of Petersburg. One of the first units to get into town was men of the A.P. Hill Corps. And leading the A.P. Hill Corps into Petersburg was the 12th Virginia Infantry. These men were, as a matter of fact, it was all the officers could do to keep them from running ahead. And so they were met in town. Apparently the town had gotten word that their sons and their husbands were coming home. And there was bunting and flags all over the buildings. People were just lining the streets cheering them on Bolingbroke Street, up Sycamore Street. The mayor was in front of the courthouse passing out cool ladles of water, thanking the boys for coming. There's a merchant on the corner of Sycamore and Washington Street that had gotten enough of that rare brew of coffee to make an entire barrel full of coffee. And the boys are dipping a cup in that coffee as they pass by on the way to the battlefield. And you know, many of the wives and the mothers and the sisters did not recognize their own kin or their own husband because they were so emaciated. Most of them had not been home within 3 years. A few had been able to get home on a furlough, but not many of them. But they were so dirty and ragged that they didn't recognize them. And they marched right on out to the battlefield. Well, they didn't see any battles that day. Matter of fact, the very next day, actually, I want a little side story here. The Yankees, when they came in and started to establish their lines, there are so many ramrods, Confederate ramrods left on the field and in the trenches where they had been killed or